All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Bill Switek. I'm a principal planner with the Wilmington Area Planning Council. I love the background slide here with all the stars, so I just couldn't resist putting that little spaceship in there at the bottom. But here today to talk about our transportation justice program. And for those of you who aren't familiar with WILMAPCO, we're the Wilmington Area Planning Council. It's the metropolitan planning organization for the Wilmington region, which includes Cecil County in Maryland and Newcastle County here in Delaware. As the MPO, we're responsible for long-range transportation planning and investment. We look at different policies to create that and realize the investment, do a lot of planning work, both at the regional level and also at the local level. And all of that culminates in different transportation projects, keeping track of the funding that goes towards them, all to realize a better transportation system for the region. And transportation justice is a big part of that work. It has been for many years. Our 2019 TJ plan is a really comprehensive plan that looks at all different facets of equity. It makes it a little bit unique in terms of what other MPOs do in up across the country. Most times, Title VI and environmental justice, language assistance, ADA and mobility challenged work all gets done separately, but we grouped it all together into one umbrella document, and that is the 2019 TJ plan. And so I'm going to be really today talking about our Title VI and environmental justice work, which really considers equity with low income and minority populations, but can always come back some other time and talk about our work with people with disabilities, seniors, households without vehicles, and so forth. But to get things started, I just wanted to play our transportation justice video that we put together at WILMAPCO, and it's only a few minutes long, so just go ahead and bear with me. All right. Well, I hope everyone liked that video. It's available on our YouTube page and also this wilmapco.org/TJ page. And welcome to a few other folks who signed on. My name again is Bill Switek, and going over our Transportation Justice Initiative. That video provided a nice overview of what it is. And really, the presentation today will talk about how your group can start to do some of that work. And my outline really is to take a look at four key messages. And one is really just to start somewhere and keep at it. Wherever you are is a good place, and just keep building on that work to incorporate equity. We're going to also talk about what good data looks like and what bad data looks like as well. Seeking measurable representative public engagement is really huge in terms of looking at equitable planning and equitable involvement. And lastly, we're going to look at how we can do open, responsive, and iterative community dialogue, especially with some examples that we have from the Route 9 corridor and as part of a master plan that I've worked on there. So the first one is just really to start somewhere and keep at it. WILMAPCO has been working in transportation equity for 2 decades now. Our first report was back in 2003. And again, a lot of this data we're citing is from the 2019 study. Back in 2003, we did some very rudimentary data analysis looking at just accessibility to bus stops from EJ areas. And so the EJ areas in this map are in blue, and we've overlaid quarter-mile buffers around where the bus stops were, and we found that the EJ areas had more bus stops than the non-EJ areas, and made the conclusion that, well, there must not be any equity concerns. But of course, that didn't really dive into the issues enough. We didn't consider that EJ groups are more reliant on the bus system. So even though overall the capacity might be a little bit better, it doesn't mean that TJ or EJ groups aren't burdened by lack of public transit. And so we've kind of evolved that analysis over the past 2 decades. And really due to advances in computer technology, we're able to crunch a lot more data and do a lot more sensitive analyses. So this is one example that we just updated this year, looking at our food deserts that are in the WILMAPCO region. And those are colored in these different polygons here. And they're actually classified by the level of transit connectivity that they have from the food deserts to grocery stores. Grocery access by transit is not something that's considered in the USDA methodology, but we incorporated that in there. And what this shows is there are definitely some food deserts that have good transit connectivity, but then also some that have poor connectivity and weak connectivity. I'm going to dive into one here, right in where my cursor is, if you guys can see that. This is the Murray Manor Trailer Park right outside of the city of Newark. And what's going on here in terms of connectivity is that the trailer park is just located too far off of the main road where the bus runs back and forth. And so folks that are living towards the back of the park have to walk over a mile to get to the bus stops. And then they also are kind of tightened in or hemmed in by this freight railroad that runs right to the south of there and separates the community from other bus stops that are running. So through all that data analysis and continuing to evolve and improve our work, today we're able to look at improvements to the system and really measure what impact it would have on the communities. And so when we looked at this analysis, we said, well, what if we took a couple of those buses off of the main line, off of Route 2 as it's coming through here, and put them on Old Capitol Trail, and so there could be a better connection to this food desert a couple times a day to get people to grocery stores. And you can see what the impact would be in terms of connectivity. So in Murray Manor, the connectivity rating would go from 5% connected all the way up to 93% of people that have an easy access to a grocery store, that they're able just to walk there to the to the bus stop within 10 minutes and then shoot over to a grocery store within a half an hour. And then there's actually other improvements in surrounding neighborhoods as well. But all those things really wouldn't have been possible without building on the work. One other thing that we've been doing a better job at in terms of improving is looking at, telling the story a little bit better. So those are numbers on a screen, but really there's people behind the numbers as well. And this is a local mom that lives in our region. Her name is Dee, and she says, I might be able to pay for my kid's medicine this month, but I also need car insurance, gas, rent, all in the same week, and it just doesn't add up. And we talked to Dee before the pandemic, before the gas prices rose, and so forth. So it's a real challenge for folks out there. And those improvements that we can make based on really good data analysis will help people at the end of the day. My second key point is like good data in, good data out. Bad data in, sometimes you get bad outcomes. So an example of what I think is kind of a bad outcome is the opportunity zone designations that are shown here on the map. And there's a lot of literature out there. There's a lot of news articles and so forth that really show that some of the money that's meant to uplift the poor communities go into wealthier places. And we have a couple examples here in Newcastle County where that's likely the case, just because of the way the data was analyzed and lack of nuance that went into it. So you can see in yellow here are the census tracts on the right hand side within Wilmington that show which areas are opportunity zones, but overlaid to those areas are also parts of the city that are very much gentrifying and very much are not low income and are very much separated from the low income communities that share the same census tracts. So this type of weak analysis really opens the door for investment in places that will uplift the wrong community in many cases. In Newark, we also have an example of a part of the University of Delaware being designated as an opportunity zone, really because the college kids were included in this analysis. They were, considered low income by the census, when in fact, when you look at some of the more nuanced data, college students from University of Delaware generally come from families that make 3 times the Delaware median wage. So when you have an analysis like this that doesn't really look at nuance, you get bad outcomes like that. So what we're doing here at WILMAPCO is trying to work on that through our environmental justice identification process for these neighborhoods, and looking at not only the census, but looking also at school data for low-income students, supplementing it further with housing data that's point level, that can pinpoint some of those places, particularly in rural areas, that might be missed by the census analysis. And on top of that, what we're trying to do is also carve out non-residential places within these block groups. So we don't have, big um, block groups and big census tracts that really shouldn't be the focus of where consideration should go. The next thing that we've also done is not to consider the minority groups that we have as one cohesive group, but to look at the different groups that we have, Blacks, Hispanics, and Asians, separately. And there's a real good reason for that. And that's our Black community is our largest community by far in terms of our minority groups. So it makes finding Hispanics and Asians difficult when you group all of the groups together. And they live in different places, and it's a very unfair process. The typical way that we define where our minority communities are. So we're trying to move away from that and look at these groups separately. Our EJ areas are used in our project prioritization process at WILMAPCO, so giving bonus points to projects that are located here, and also taking points away for projects that might not be beneficial for the neighborhoods. This project or this data set is publicly downloadable, it's interactive. We really believe in open data here, transparent data, and so forth. One of the other ways to have better data is to look at residential concentrations, as I mentioned, and really just pull out the different groups. So this is an example of where our Black residential concentrations are in the WILMAPCO region. And we really use these more nuanced analyses for the equity analysis, for looking at where our spending is going, our food deserts, our crashes, and so forth. Again, this data is publicly downloadable, and the importance of looking at it this way is really illustrated on this these two charts. So our previous way, just looking at our environmental justice areas as a whole and looking at our transportation spending, we could see that there was a decline over the past couple of decades in transportation spending within EJ areas that you can see over on the left. But we didn't really know where that decline was happening. Once we started pulling the groups apart and doing the analysis in a more nuanced way, we could see that there was really the most decline in our Black neighborhoods. It was a 38% cumulative less funding than we would expect over the past 2 decades that went into Black neighborhoods. And we really didn't see that disparity at all with any of the other groups that are in the EJ analysis. So just doing it this way and evolving the process really makes it much more nuanced and more actionable for doing work. So that's about it with my data slides. I know some of you like data, others don't. The next ones I'm going to talk about are really more public outreach focused. So this one is really seek measurable representative public engagement. And the reason why this is important is because it's very hard to do. And you end up with projects sometimes that are very disparate in terms of who you're talking to. I think the best example of this that I've seen is actually an international one from about a decade ago when the BBC tried to do a social class survey in the UK. You could go to the website that they had and take a test to see what social class you were in. And then based on all the results, they were going to figure out what the different social classes were in the UK, what percentage of people were in each class. But when they were doing the test, they realized that, wait a minute, everybody is from largely the same social class, that there must be something wrong with the test. But there really wasn't. It was just that people from the same social class tend to do this type of online testing. And so they had to supplement this work with more traditional work that looked at a better representation of demographics in the country to really do their work. We see that all the time in planning. I think you can look at just about all the comprehensive plans and see a mismatch between who you're talking to and the demographics of the community. And we also see a racial dimension to that as well. In our work at WILMAPCO, we do a telephone survey in the lead up to our long range plan. And you can see up there on the top in 2010, the survey produced 78% of the folks we talked to were white in the survey, when in actuality in the region, whites only make up 63% of the population. So it was an overrepresentation of whites in the survey. And that's a real problem when you're basing decision making on that sample and it's not reflective of the people that you're serving. So what we did was made some changes, and we introduced quotas into our survey beginning in 2018 to say we're going to keep calling people until we get an accurate sample here, or close to an accurate sample racially of folks. And we did. And so you can see we were much closer in 2018. We got 64% whites when the actual population is 59%. In our last survey, I think we got even closer to that. And you can see by looking at some of the results in the survey why this is. These are data that are really hot off the press. I haven't even had a chance to graph them. They just came in last week, but you can see in our 2022 survey, this is folks who said, yes, online surveys are effective. And for about half of people in the region, 54%, they say they agree with that. And we all know that working in government, we love online surveys. They're easy to do. You just put it out there and the results come back. For folks making over 100,000 a year, they're more likely to agree with that. But importantly, people who make under $25,000 a year, the low income folks, only 30% said that online surveys were an effective way to get their feedback. So it really has to make you think, is this really the best way to hear from everybody? In a similar vein, this is another one where it says, yes, web-based public meetings are effective for reaching me. And even more starkly, the average household, 70% said, yes, web-based meetings are effective. For folks that make under 25,000, less than 40% agreed with that. So have to do a much better job reaching those folks if it's going to be a fair process. So in terms of why this happens, we identified some some work at WILMAPCO that looks at where our urban tech deserts are. And these are basically just places where, largely because of income, there's no internet connection in the household. So you can see within our tech deserts, almost half have no internet in within that household, whether it's broadband or whether it's even not broadband, but generally most of the internet here is broadband. And it's not because there's a lack of broadband, it's because just the inability to afford it. We certainly saw that at the beginning of the pandemic when kids had to go into remote schools. And the first day of school in the Christina School District in Wilmington, 1/3 of the kids didn't show up because of the connectivity issues. You can also see here at the bottom pie that there's a racial dimension to this as well. So it's a very important equity consideration. So what things do work? Going back to that survey that we had, these are ways to really reach low income households. The number one way is really direct communication. Whether you're calling somebody on the phone, just talking to them directly. You can see 78% said that that's an effective way, meeting them on the street, engaging them that way. Mailed or phone surveys, 60% said that was effective. Public meetings that are in person, 56% said there's effective. So these are great ways to supplement that work. Also want to mention that there's some racial differences in terms of effective engagement strategies that we found in our 2022 survey. So for Blacks and Hispanics, much more likely to say that text message surveys are effective ways, 66% and 70 versus whites at 44. And social media, whether that's Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, more likely 63 and 61% to say that's effective versus whites at 45%. So this really can help reshape the type of outreach that you're doing to reach a more equitable audience. We certainly had to do that working within the Southbridge neighborhood plan in this past year. This is a tech desert in Wilmington. Got grant funding from the Healthy Communities Delaware to do this update to a neighborhood plan. But we knew that we couldn't do the traditional thing that was happening at the time, which is just do everything online and get the feedback that way. It wouldn't work in Southbridge. So the effort was really driven to do door-to-door surveying, some in-person events where we could and when we could be outside. And you can see that really the proof was in the pudding there. Only 8% of the surveys that we had to put together the neighborhood plan were done online. So 90% of the interactions were in person. Plan couldn't have gotten done otherwise. So it's super, super important to know your community characteristics, as we did in Southbridge, to really build an outreach approach. Many of you who work in towns kind of know where these different areas are within the communities. But if you're working in a new one, you can go out there and pull that data to look at who lives in that community. How's that going to impact how you reach them? How are you going to get that representative sample? So these are some base layers that we have at WILMAPCO that we use when we're looking at a new study. So this is the Churchman's Crossing study that we did. And you can see we have the EJ areas. We have mobility challenged areas, which are places of seniors, people with disabilities, zero car households. We got the social determinants of health index, which is, where we have concerns for public health, limited English areas, low literacy areas, and then also those tech deserts. And knowing all those things, again, will help you form an engagement approach that hits all of the boundaries. And so this is a model that I kind of follow that looks at just different ways that you can engage the public, whether they're passive approaches like having a workshop, whether it's online or in person, stakeholder engagement, getting stakeholders to come to you, online engagement, which kind of goes either way, and then more active approaches like going out to community events, doing mobile outreach on the street. And I think you're going to see that each of the importance of these different slices varies by community. There's some communities where you can just do only online engagement and you'll be totally fine. Some communities where you can get a really good sample just based on some of these blue strategies. But then there are other communities where you definitely have to do more of that legwork, more of those active approaches to get a good sample. That was certainly the case on the Route 9 corridor when I worked on the Route 9 master plan, which is, again, it was a tech desert. It's an area of low income and minority communities. You could see that in that plan, only 4% of people engaged with us online. We had some engagement, at workshops, 28%, but really most of the engagement was out there on the street, in parking lots, at community events. 67% of folks got involved with that study there. One of the other things that we did there was looked at place as a way for looking at, are we covering everybody? And so this map on the left shows attendance at our public workshop, and the white dots show where people live that came to the public workshop. And you can see we had a lot of squares there on the map, but we were also missing some of the neighborhoods along this corridor. So we actually kind of circled the places that we were missing, and then went out directly, targeted those areas for additional outreach. So in the end, we had a really good sample up and down the corridor, with varying communities to be part of the process. Be remiss to mention that we did also do a lot of youth engagement with this plan. We noticed that youth were a group that was not engaging with us in the traditional way, so we went out to them. We developed a separate process where we were really presenting them with the same material, just in different ways, to get their feedback on the plan. And that's a really important equity consideration as well. And surprise, surprise, youth have different needs than the seniors in Route 9. And it was really eye-opening to see how some of those were different, and we were able to incorporate those into the plan. So some of the takeaways with this section with representative samples: really shoot for that sample by race, ethnicity, income. It's going to require deliberate engagement, deliberate tracking of who you're talking to. So, what's their background, where do they live, and really that online engagement is not going to work everywhere. So that's another key point. Last thing, I'm going to end with pursuing an open and responsive and iterative community dialogue during the development and implementation. So it's really great to try to reach deeply into the community, but also really involving the community leaders throughout the process. I love this slide from the American Planning Association that looks at just different ways you can do public outreach, from just informing people about things, sending flyers out saying, hey, this is happening, consulting folks, all the way up to empowering the community to really do some of the work. And that's where we're really shooting with some of our efforts here, is to move into that empowerment phase, where we can have action teams that are working on specific topics that are of interest to the group, where we can delegate some of the responsibility to do some of the work, create some nonprofits to push it, and develop local leaders. As you're kind of doing this work, and if you're working within a community that's been traumatized in the past, really, it's important to kind of look at some of those practices that are out there around how to do work within traumatized communities. And there's some great work on the West Coast that I'm citing here, but you can see just some of the examples of work that you can do as you start that engagement. Looking at acknowledging harm done is really important. So on the Route 9 corridor, it was looking at how there really shouldn't have been a mix of residential with industrial uses, the way that the community lives there now. We're doing a study in Wilmington on I-95 and potentially capping it. And early on, really acknowledged that, hey, this interstate wasn't built in the right way. It's led to a division within the communities. It's not the right thing. And that goes a long way when trying to build trust with the groups. A lot of other ones here that you can take a look at as well. So our monitoring committee in Route 9 is really an example of this work in process. We've got civic leaders, we've got businesses, nonprofits, government, residents, all around the table, really to try to help guide and fulfill the recommendations that we have in the master plan. And importantly, it's through that collaborative dialogue and through that empowerment of the group to start to work on some of these some of these issues. I've had a lot of success over the past few years with this model. It's not an easy model to implement. There's a lot of legwork that goes into it, but certainly it's been productive. We have $15 million now in dedicated funding that DelDOT has set aside to work on the Route 9 master plan and implement some of the transportation projects that came out of it. They've come right to the committee and said, hey, which ones do you want to go first? Which ones are most important? Looking at land use policy, so really close work with the Newcastle County when they've just updating their 2050 comprehensive plan and providing, meeting after meeting of guidance of how we can incorporate that master plan into the county comp plan, into that legal document to really start seeing some of the land use change that the community wants to see. We also did a health needs assessment and action plan, and this wasn't work that came out of the master plan itself. It was just another community need that arose as we were all sitting around the table. This is work led by UD's Cooperative Extension, and it really tries to close a gap between what state data says about public health in the corridor and cancer risk and impacts of the environment on health and what the community feels. And those two things, there's a wide gulf between them. So we did another door-to-door survey, looked at some of the key health needs in the area, and now that small action team is working on an action plan to start tackling some of those needs. Community cohesion building through better air monitoring, through safety improvements, things like that. We also were able to leverage some of the funding through Healthy Communities Delaware to do a community development corporation study, really to try to drive some of those land use goals, and did a feasibility study. And now they've got some early seed money to get that nonprofit started, to work on really empowering the community a little bit more through that CDC work. We'll say that it's a good model for avoiding some problems that can come up as well. And I'm just going to end with this example here. This is a real interesting story that's been forming out of Philadelphia, looking at Washington Avenue there. Sophia Schmidt, who many of you might know, she was a reporter with NPR here in Delaware for many years, and she's moved up to working in Philadelphia. She's been covering it. But long story short, the city was looking to do a road diet on this stretch of Washington Avenue, taking it down in most cases to 3 lanes. They did a tremendous amount of outreach, a lot of surveying. They were tracking people by zip codes and things like that. So I was pretty impressed with the amount of outreach they did just on the surface. But as this project proceeded, they started to get real pushback from the local residents who said, we weren't really involved in this work. You didn't consult with us. Most of this is consulting with other people. So it really stopped the project in its tracks. They had to go back and do a compromise, hybrid approach to Washington Avenue now that maybe could have been avoided. It reminds me of some work that we've did as part of the Route 9 work on Memorial Drive, which is a connector road between Route 9 and US 13. Much more residential and calm than Washington Avenue, but it still had its challenges. As you can see here, it was a 2-lane in each direction that encouraged speeding just because there really wasn't that many cars using the road. I talked to parents at this intersection who said, geez, I would love to take my kids to the community center, but this road is just too treacherous for me to get across with 3 kids. So through that planning effort, we wanted to take this road and put it on a road diet, to take one of these lanes out, make it safer to cross, get cars to slow down, and so forth. And this, long story short, we had funding to get this study done. Everybody was excited, but we had a public meeting, and folks came out that lived along the road mainly and said, this is a bad idea. I'm not going to be able to get out of my driveway. There's going to be issues with traffic backups. It's going to be awful. But because we had the monitoring committee in place, we were able to really work through those issues and those angst really with the civic leaders on both sides of this roadway, and they, really came together to throw their support behind this project and said, yes, we want to get it done. It's an important thing. So if you go to the Route 9 corridor today, you'll see the Memorial Drive road diet. It's a much calmer road than it was. We've been able to track that the speeds have gone down there, that the flow has been maintained. It did drop by one level of service grade, but that's only a few second delay. So those predictions about traffic Armageddon really never came to fruition. And really, most importantly, we're seeing some fewer crashes occur on Memorial Drive. So in 2020, the first year of the diet, we had six. As people have gotten used to it, they've calmed down. It's only two this past year. So some key takeaways here with this last point is really investing in that trust building. And that's really all about coming to the table, but then also really listening to what the community wants to have and acting in that way. A lot of times with government, we have an idea about what needs to be done, but it's really all about working and hearing what the community wants to have done, and using that as a priority, similar to the work that we did with that health assessment on Route 9. Make it a team effort. So planners and civic leaders and local leaders collaborating, and just understanding that we none of us all have the answers. It's good to just get around a table and put everything that we know, put our heads together, and we'll come up with the best approach. Ensuring transparency is very important for these processes that go on and on and on for many years, because you have people that jump on the train halfway through. They're going to want to see what's happened in the past. And there's going to be that mistrust that what are you doing, in this community? What's the issue? But if you have that documentation there, I find that it really helps alleviate those fears. Developing a shared vision and mission is super important as well. EJ communities have a lot of different needs. We can't cover them all with some of the work, but let's get together and decide what we can cover, and come up with that shared vision and mission, and work on those things when we're doing this work. And finally, just don't be afraid to make mistakes. I talk to a lot of folks in government that are a little bit scared to go into EJ communities and do work. They're like, man, I'm not sure if this is going to be received well or not well. But I would say just go out there, take the plunge, see what happens. The community will definitely forgive you if you keep coming back and work through those issues. Overall, that's my presentation. So I know we have about 20 minutes for questions, and my timer is about to go off. So I'm happy to take any if you drop them in the chats. I'm not sure if we can unmute people or how it works, but happy to take any questions if you have them.
If anyone would like to ask a question, we can unmute you and allow you to speak. I have a question, Bill.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know if you would know this for certain, but do you know of other projects like this in other states and other cities? Like, I guess I'm thinking more other states. Like, is this a common thing, or is this something that you guys are doing that's groundbreaking and different?
It's definitely different. I think we're pushing it to a different level, but really all states and MPOs are scrambling now, particularly with the new administration's emphasis on equity, to do some of this work. And so there are great examples of this from Boston, and trying to think of a couple others that have done some similar work. I think California always has like a few good examples. San Francisco, but we're taking it to a different level by combining all of those equity requirements requirements into one document. And also, I think some of the work with the communities and having sustained presence there and a sustained community building is something that's fairly unique.
Well, thank you for answering that. And I know I was in and out a little bit, checking on other people's sessions and that sort of thing. But is this something that you like? I enjoyed it very much, and I thought it was very important. Is this something that you've looked to share beyond, say, just us in Delaware? Are you like applying to conferences and that sort of thing with that as well?
I didn't catch the last sentence. Sorry.
Sorry, are you applying like to other conferences and that sort of thing as well?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been to the AMPO conference, which is the groups of MMPOs across the country. I've been to a lot of FHWA work. I've been presented to folks in North Carolina and Florida about the work as well. So it's been doing kind of a tour of it um, in different conferences across the country.
Wonderful. That's really good to hear and very excited. Thank you so much for sharing today.
Sure. Well, it seems like folks want to get out early. There doesn't seem to be any more questions. Should we close out?
That sounds like a good plan to me. Thank you so much. I'll stop the recording.
All right. Well, I appreciate you having me, and anytime, just feel free to reach out. There's my contact information. Just go to our website. Happy to meet with you to help you on your equity journey.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you. Have a good day.
Take care.